start with a quick story about what pushes me to do the work I do. So, in the year 2000, Mattingly and the World Bank had privatized water in parts of Bolivia. And as a student at the time, reading about these protests because many people were no longer able to afford this daily necessity was, to me, so immediately a narrative of abuse by several powerful polluting agencies that it changed the way I worked. So, while prior I kept an art and activism, I kept my activism and my art sort of unintentionally separate. After that, everything I needed to make felt much more urgent. Simultaneously that year there were 3 catastrophic floods around the world and people were evacuating homes. This became a common story. And personally, I moved 5 times that year. So all of this sort of led me to imagine and design living systems for moving that I called wearable homes. I asked myself, what do I need to carry with me so as to not be tied to the sedentary infrastructure? So I designed wearable homes around the idea that this way of life will not only be more widespread while people are forced to move due to increased prominence of environmental instability, but I would also test these wearable homes in undeveloped locations to improve them. So the wearable homes were basically these 3-part systems that were for an Arctic, a desert, tundra, and a waterlogged area. And they had different systems inside of them, so they could purify water, they could warm a person at night through solar panels that would charge small batteries during the day. They were really DIY, but I worked on the project for several years to create narratives depicting situations that felt like we're all will face in the future. Later, I began sort of illustrating a possible world not based on an insular person wearing a protective capsule, but instead on collaborative models to understand a more perhaps positive future in my mind. So I organized the making of collaborative sculptures of these mobile living systems. Some of these sculptures were made by asking people to mail parts of the sculpture to, say, an exhibition space or a public space. And then their contribution would pretty much form the overall sculpture. Other times, less of a sculpture and more of an action. For instance, the flotilla in the lower center just kind of demanded that people work together to create a story that could talk about the issues facing climate change, water, sea level rise, and its adverse effects of desertification in other areas. So this is the project that I really want to present today. And I believe that in many cases, artists do their best work when they tell their own stories, because within the personal lies the universal. So I was living in New York City and housing continued to be my primary focus. It was an immediate need and something that I struggled to frankly keep. So more than anything, I wanted to create a living space that was both autonomous, independent from the local grids, and community-based, dependent on neighbors through bartering systems, gift exchanges, learning, and curiosity. So I wanted to build on the water because it's still part of the commons and part shared jurisdiction, and sort of opened up the possibility of a local free space, I thought. The water pod project's design changed repeatedly after meeting with officials such as the Coast Guard and the New York City Department of Buildings. The original capsule design demanded much more nautical engineering resources than I had, so substituting the sphere for a barge was the first of a long series of compromises as an artist that I would need to make in order to undertake this project in the heavily fleeced New York waterways. So this is what it ended up looking like, and I'll go through the process of how it came about. One of my main motivations for undertaking this was to learn how to make things that met my everyday needs. So I didn't want to feel dependent on a water company to sell me expensive water in the future. I wanted to know how to collect and purify the water around me to be able to have it in times of need. I also wanted to challenge others to learn the same things. So when it was finally finished, it looked like this, with both public and private spaces on board. When the project was on schedule to tour the 5 boroughs, teams were formed to take on certain systems necessary to create the living machine that 5 of my artist friends who would live and work on the water pod could survive on, potentially without ever having to leave for resources. So one artist, Carissa Carmen, led the living systems team. She designed a distribution system and companion planting system that we would eat from. found materials dictated the design inevitably. So collecting supplies involved basically locating, acquiring, storing, and integrating materials that would meet local building code. Materials gathered ranged from old billboards to scrap metal, stage sets, wood from old water towers. We led a volunteer building team ranging from anywhere from 3 to 20 volunteers, and pretty much built rain or shine on the Brooklyn Navy Yards. Prior to this, relationships were created with towing companies, legal firms, the Department of Parks, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and local businesses, all supporting the project with in-kind services and creating a community-based infrastructure that kept the project afloat. So in June 2009, the waterpod began its 5-month course, visiting 8 piers via 2 rivers, a bay, and a sound. The lower left of this image is a 1,500-gallon rainwater collection tank on the edge of the barge. We decided to go with rainwater for all of our water needs just because the diversity of the water going from the East River to the Hudson was pretty hard to essentially clean. So each resident used about 7 gallons of purified rainwater a day, much less than the average citizen. So just to explain the parts, clockwise from the small dome containing a hydroponic system, which is the top left, we had window frames, sub-irrigated planters, a second exit gangway, a shower, a galley, dry composting toilet, living quarters, a main public space covered by a geodesic dome, a chicken coop with 4 chickens for fresh eggs, gray water tanks, the potable water tank, the main gangway entrance, and several garden beds and compost areas. So learning how to take care of this size vessel with an average 6-foot tide differential, live off fruits, vegetables, and eggs, and keep everything running smoothly, pretty much filled an 18-hour day with problems, but many more rewards. From an extended understanding of the strength of community to chance meetings and conversations, we learned so much from our temporary neighbors, and in exchange, we offered free programs, events, and classes. During the week, the waterpod was an open public space. Scheduling with the Department of Education, we held daytime workshops for school groups across the 5 boroughs. And I think one of the most powerful parts of the project, looking back, was witnessing kids' excitement over live chickens or awe about how we were living. It sort of all motivated us to give them assignments to depict their own waterpod, which then we sort of used to improve ours. And as the project toured the waterways, support for the narrative grew. Neighbors would frequent the waterpod on weekends, giving tutorials, for instance, making simple sub-irrigated planters from reused 5-gallon buckets, or turning compost scrap into soil for growing their own food. The power system that we had on board consisted of basically 12 solar photovoltaic panels, batteries, and an AC converter. We used a rocket stove and a solar cooker for cooking, and this was enough to meet all of our power needs. We had a backup bicycle power system, and that didn't work that well. 5 one-laptop child's computers were available, and through the project's duration, people ended up loaning us different DIY technologies for our use that we tried to integrate most of the time. The Sustainable Technologies team was led by a teacher from Humboldt State University, and a semester before the waterpod's launch, they designed criteria for the living systems. Basically, what we did was that we explained our parameters for the projects that we would need, and they ended up building plans or building them and then sending them to us for a basic food, power, and water-based infrastructure. So this is the last weekend, and we actually used, we were pretty impressed because we used the solar power to be able to power projectors all night for a celebratory party. And I guess one thing that became very clear was how dependent we were on the weather and how much we needed the sun, how dependent our events were on good weather. I remember we had Joyce Rosenthal from Columbia speaking about climate change during a big storm, and it had to be canceled halfway through. And I guess as a social space, we were in constant awe of the kindness of strangers. And we witnessed on-board meetings that had resulted in partnerships and have learned to do things we never thought we would need to know. According to the official count, over 200,000 people visited the waterpod on its 5-month route. So, as a living experiment and, in a sense, as a performance, the project was dependent on chance situations. It meant to open avenues for water-based permits because it was unclear how this project should be permitted by the U.S. Coast Guard. We ended up getting 18 different permits from the Department of Environmental Conservation to be active scale for the chickens. So in the end, I hope that the project would inspire people to do more projects like this and sort of represents a space that was autonomous and flexible at the same time. While exploring options for the future of this project, including creating a permanent water-based space that could be used for school programming, I began to focus on pre-existing land-based infrastructure. I think it was really difficult to work on the water. So the project that I'm currently working on, I'll just show a couple slides of, and it's essentially reflecting the necessary future of urban and rural space. I'm asking, what if habitats were more collapsible?